Greetings, comrades and friends. You haven't heard from me in a long time. At least you haven't heard me addressing you in English. But this is a grave moment. A moment we should all be very concerned about the future of humankind. A moment of great tensions. A moment of growing danger of a nuclear war. Syria one more time could turn out to be the powder keg of the world. You see, great imperialist powers are once again using Syria as a pretext for an inter-imperialist war. A war between the imperialist superpowers, which can only be nuclear. The Syrian powder keg could trigger a nuclear holocaust once more. We have all seen what happened 1 year ago in Syria, when Trump, using a chemical attack as a pretext, launched an airstrike, a devastating airstrike on Syria. Today it's the same. A new chemical attack has allegedly been carried out by the Syrian regime against the Western-backed opposition. There is once again talk of a US military strike on Syria, which is in fact a military aggression. Let's call it what it is. Let's call it by its rightful name, a military aggression. No, United States are not concerned with human rights. They don't give a damn about the plight of Syrian civilians. Had they given a damn about the plight of ordinary civilians, they would not have launched wars of aggression against Afghanistan, against Iraq, against Libya. No, they would not have done this, because we have all seen the human cost of this war. The human suffering that was a consequence of these wars. You cannot expect a power that has slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Iraqis just in the past decade alone. You cannot expect such a power to feel sympathy for Syrian civilians. You cannot expect an empire of evil which has killed, maimed an enormous number of civilians in the past decade alone, to genuinely care about ordinary civilians. I mean, that's illogical, that's utterly nonsensical. How can a butcher feel pity? No, that's utterly nonsensical, that's impossible, an impossibility. Do we really know for certain that Assad has carried out a chemical attack on Syrian civilians? There isn't enough evidence. What about the use of white phosphorus by US military against Syrian civilians in the offensive against ISIS? White phosphorus. Mark the words. That was horrible. That was appalling. And yet it was the US that carried it out. But I mean, even if Assad did carry out that chemical attack, it's not the United States. The United States are in no position to point a finger at Assad. How can a butcher accuse another butcher of being a butcher? How can a big butcher accuse a small butcher of being a butcher? It's once again utterly nonsensical. I mean, even if Assad did carry out that attack, what's happening in Syria is an internal business of the Syrian people. Those are internal affairs of the Syrian peoples, horrifying as it may be. There is a war in Syria that's been going on for 7 years now. And the only way to stop it is by stop interfering, cease interfering in foreign affairs, in Syria's internal affairs. That's the only way of bringing the carnage to an end. That's absolutely the only way of bringing the carnage to an end. We must not allow Syria to become the pretext for a nuclear war. Some who call themselves communists, say that there is no longer inter-imperialist rivalry. That inter-imperialist rivalries are dying down. Guess what? They are not dying down. Inter-imperialist rivalries is sharpening up. It's getting worse with each passing year. It's getting worse and worse. It's not dying down, it's getting worse. Let's look at the past 10 years, at the past decade, 2008, 2018. We've seen an unparalleled increase in tension between Russia and the United States, and more recently between the United States and China, which can only be indicative of one thing: the sharpening of inter-imperialist rivalries. What we've seen in the past decade is an unprecedented deterioration in US-Russia and US-China relations, which can only be indicative of sharpening inter-imperialist rivalries. We've seen it in Georgia. Russia moved into the US sphere of domination by force. We've seen it in Ukraine. Both empires are tearing Ukraine apart, each part trying to grab a chunk of Ukraine. The United States trying to grab Ukraine, Russia trying to grab Ukraine and drag it into its own sphere of influence. We've seen it in Syria. We had a close call last year, April 2017, a close call. The world was on the brink of a nuclear holocaust following Trump's missile strike on Syria. Russia has since warned the United States that it will not tolerate a US strike on Syria. They will rush to Syria to Assad's defense against the United States. What can this mean? Only one thing: inter-imperialist conflict, which can only translate into nuclear holocaust. My friends, the stakes are very high. They've never been so high. It's worse than during the height of the Cold War. It's much worse. The world has never been so close. We are literally on the brink of a Holocaust. The only force that can save us from a Holocaust is the peoples of the world. People's power can defeat imperialist power. People's power must stand up to imperialist might. Might is not right. The peoples of the world need to take a decisive stand. Let's suppose for a minute that it doesn't happen. Suppose for a minute that Russia and America reach a form of agreement. It will only delay the Holocaust. Even if it doesn't happen now, the inter-imperialist rivalry will continue to sharpen. Even if it doesn't happen now, it will happen one day. If things get worse and worse, it will boil over, the situation will boil over, it will happen one day. If things get worse and worse, if things keep getting worse, there will be a nuclear holocaust. The only force that can stop a nuclear holocaust is people's power. People must take to the streets. There are millions of progressive Americans that can put pressure on insane Trump, the most evil, the most wicked head of state in the world. Millions of Americans must take to the street, put pressure on their own government, put pressure on their own imperialist government to abstain from going to war. We must put pressure, the American people must put pressure on insane Trump, on wicked Trump, on evil Trump. They must not only do that, but they must also strive to turn the tide of popular discontent into a revolution. You see, it's only a revolution that can defeat imperialism. Imperialism will not die of its own accord. Imperialism has to be crushed. The only force that can do that is a people's revolution, a workers' revolution, a socialist revolution. The future of humanity is at stake. The future of our species is at stake. Stakes have never been so high. We have a great responsibility to stop this madman. And the Russian people too, they too must take to the streets to call for a Russian withdrawal from Syria, because every imperialist power has to withdraw. Both Russia and America have to withdraw from Syria. You see, that's the only way out of this predicament. Say no to imperialist war. Say no to imperialist involvement in Syria. We demand an immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all US and Russian forces from Syria. May history have mercy on us. It's all up to us, my friends. Good luck, my friends.